Hi friends, I hope you all are doing fantastic and I am so much overwhelmed to receive your observations on my email about our lesson on agriculture revolution. Some of you have written that you are still feeling very nostalgic about it. In fact, the topic is such. As I promised you in my previous lesson that the succeeding lesson will be again about a great human transformation which massively changed the entire structure of mankind, and that is what we are going to discuss today. I am sure you all must have made your respective guesswork, and if your guess is industrial revolution, you are 100% right. In today's class, we will discuss about industrial revolution, what were the factors which contributed to it, and of course, whenever you talk about industrial revolution, we talk about industries, we talk about cities, we talk about urbanization. So let us begin our deliberations now. So as we know that the industrial revolution was the period when manufacturing of goods moved from small shops and homes to large factories. This shift brought about changes in culture as people moved from rural areas to big cities in order to work. It also introduced new technologies, new types of transportation and a different way of life for many. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain in late 1700s. Many of the first innovations that enabled Industrial Revolution began in the textile industry. Yes, you have heard it right, textile industry. Making cloth moved from homes to large factories. Britain also had plenty of coal and iron, which was important for power and make machines for the factories. So in this lesson on Industrial Revolution, we will be able to understand more in depth about how things happened in Industrial Revolution. I have always told my students here also and earlier also that English movies are one of the best ways to understand many social realities. And I am sure you all must have seen Charlie Chaplin's movie. Why am I bringing him into context here is we will see the initial phase of Industrial Revolution, what kind of setups existed when you see his movies. The Industrial Revolution lasted for over 100 years. After beginning in Britain in late 1700s, it spread to other parts of Europe and the United States. The Industrial Revolution can be divided into two distinct phases. The first Industrial Revolution was the first wave which lasted from late 1700s to mid 1800s. It industrialized the manufacture of textiles and began the move of production from homes to factories. So from domi-centric to industrial centric. Steam power and the cotton gin played an important role in this period. When we talk about the second Industrial Revolution, which is the next wave which took place from mid 1800s to early 1900s. During this phase, large factories and companies began to use more technologies to mass produce goods. Important innovations during this period included the use of electricity, the production line and the Bessemer steel process. The American Industrial Revolution, according to some experts, is commonly referred as Second Industrial Revolution. The early part of the Industrial Revolution in the United States took place in the Northeast in New England region. Many historians place the start of the Industrial Revolution with the opening of Slater's Mill in 1793 in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Samuel Slater had learned about the textile mills growing up in England and brought his knowledge to United States. By end of 1800s, the United States had become the most industrialized nation in the world. The Industrial Revolution brought about many cultural changes, and as students of urban sociology, this is our focus. Before the revolution, most people lived in the country and worked on farms. During revolution, people moved to cities to work in factories. So we see a kind of a migration. Cities grew and became overcrowded, unsanitary and polluted. In many cities, poor workers lived in crowded and unsafe buildings. This was a dramatic shift in the way of life for the average person. The Industrial Revolution marked a period of development in the later half of the 18th century that transformed largely rural agrarian societies in Europe and America into industrialized urban ones. Goods that had once been crafted by hand started to be produced in mass quantities by machines in factories. So that is what, as I said, from domi-centric way of living to industry based way of living, and this change was due to introduction of new machines and techniques in textiles, iron making and other industries. Industrial Revolution began in Britain and spread to rest of the world, including the United States by 1830s and 1840s. Modern historians often refer to this period as First Industrial Revolution to set it apart from second period or second wave of industrialization that took place from the late 19th to early 20th centuries and saw rapid advances in the steel, electric and automobile industries. Dear friends, we see that Britain had a long history of producing textiles like wool, linen and cotton. But prior to Industrial Revolution, the British textile business was a true cottage industry, with the work performed in the small workshops or even homes by individual spinners, weavers and dyers. Starting in mid 18th century, innovations like flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, the water frame and power loom made weaving cloth and spinning yarn and thread much easier, which contributed in textile industry. Therefore, producing cloth became more faster with less human labor. More efficient mechanized production meant Britain's new textile factories could meet the growing demand for cloth both at home and abroad, whereas the nation's several colonies provided a captive market for its goods. In addition to textiles, the British iron industry also adopted new innovations, and innovations are significant pillars for Industrial Revolution. For instance, smelting of iron ore with coke, a material which is made by heating coal instead of traditional charcoal. This method was both cheaper and produced higher quality material, enabling Britain's iron and steel production to expand in response to demand created by the Napoleonic Wars between 1803 to 1815 and later the growth of railroad industry. In the early 1700s, Thomas Newcomen designed the prototype for the first modern steam engine. Let me take a minute to explain you why the steam engine became critical aspect of Industrial Revolution. Prior to the invention of the steam engine, everything was manual. People would work things with hand and probably very simple equipments which were not mechanical in nature at all. But with the invention of steam engine, it facilitated massive level of mechanical work and thus facilitating working of machines and formation of industries. And that is why you must have read that Industrial Revolution was succeeded by a very important process called as industrialization. And whenever we talk about industrialization, urbanization will also accompany it. We will discuss about all these things more in detail in our coming lessons. So, the first modern steam engine was called the atmospheric steam engine. Newcomen's invention was originally applied to power the machines used to pump water out of mine shafts. In 1760s, Scottish engineer James Watt, this is a very important invention again, James Watt collaborated with Matthew Boulton to invent a steam engine with a rotary motion, a key innovation that would allow steam power to spread across British industries including flour, paper and cotton mills, iron works, distilleries, water works and canals. The demand for coal skyrocketed throughout the Industrial Revolution and also beyond, as it would be needed to run not only the factories used to produce manufactured goods, but also the railroads and steamships used for transporting them. Transportation, communication and banking developed during Industrial Revolution. Britain's road network, which had been relatively very primitive prior to industrialization, soon saw a substantial improvement and more than 2000 miles of canals, yes, 2000 miles of canals were in use across Britain by 1815. In the early 1800s, Richard Trevithick deputed a steam-powered locomotive, and in 1830, similar locomotives started transporting freight as well as passengers between the industrial hubs of Manchester and Liverpool. By that time, steam-powered boats and ships were already in wide use, carrying goods along Britain's rivers and canals as well as across the Atlantic. Dear friends, please take a minute to think and analyze that how important was the role of such inventions in Industrial Revolution. Without these inventions of steam, I don't think Industrial Revolution could have been so much accelerated as it was. The later part of Industrial Revolution also saw key advances in communication methods as people increasingly saw the need to communicate efficiently over long distances. In 1837, British inventors William Cooke and Charles Wheatstone patented the first commercial telegraphy system, even as Samuel Morse and other inventors worked on their own versions in United States. Cooke and Wheatstone's system would be used for railroad signaling, as the speed of the new trains had created a need for more sophisticated means of communication as well as transportation. Banks and industrial financiers rose to new prominence during the period, as well as a factory system dependent on owners and managers. One of the major changes which caused by Industrial Revolution is in the breakup of home industry and its replacement by the factory. This revolution has transformed irrevocably the relations between capital and labor. And I am sure, friends, you must have heard about Karl Marx, who has written extensively about this beautiful connection between capital, labor, and in his voluminous book Das Kapital, he has written extensively about capitalism. And I'm sure you must have read, and in case if you have not done any reading on this, I think you should do that to get a holistic picture about the role of capitalism and labor and how it transformed the human society and also led to conflict, because we know that Karl Marx's name is familiar with conflict perspective. With the new factory system, the position of the workers changed. As they were together, they could discuss their grievances, and gradually a class conscience developed. This concept we also find in Karl Marx theory. All through the 19th century, trade unions had been developing, their object being to secure a standard wage, limitations on working hours and decent working conditions. Because of industrial revolution, we see movement of people to cities. Though many people in Britain had begun moving to cities from rural areas before industrial revolution, this process accelerated dramatically with industrialization as the rise of large factories turned smaller towns into major cities over the span of decades. This rapid urbanization, now you must be wondering that I was talking about industrialization, then how urbanization has come into picture. Please remember, my dear friends, industrialization and urbanization, they are a kind of a couple process. Why I say it is a couple process? Because wherever industrialization takes place, by and large, by default, urbanization also takes place because of the help of another process called as migration. So, because of urbanization, cities were becoming overcrowded, they suffered from pollution, inadequate sanitation and a lack of clean drinking water. Meanwhile, as industrialization increased, economic output overall and improved, the standard of living for middle and upper classes, poor and working class people continued to struggle. The mechanization of labor created by technological innovation had made working in factories increasingly tedious and sometimes dangerous, and many workers were forced to work long hours for pitifully low wages. Such dramatic changes fueled opposition to industrialization. The general features of the industrial revolution in every country have been, on the basis of these indicators, what are they? Decline of handwork and domestic production relatively to machine work in factories. Separation of agriculture and industry as two separate pursuits. Growth of towns, of course. The cleavage of social classes. Upper class, middle class, lower class, and if you go by Karl Marx analysis, bourgeoisie and proletariat. The rise of huge businesses and monster impersonal corporations. Growth of education under supervision of the state. Apart from this, we also see authoritative regulation of industrial conditions so as to fix a minimum standard. Let us now discuss few aspects about industrial revolution in India. India was famous for her handicrafts right from pre-British times. During the Mughal period, India had a considerable variety of arts and handicrafts. In several handicrafts, specialization of jobs had advanced to such an extent that particular classes of artisans undertook distinct processes in the class of production, and the products commanded wide range of foreign markets. In bigger towns, each handicraft was organized into a guild which safeguarded the professional interest of its members. Let me take a second to explain you what is a guild. Guild is nothing but a kind of a group or a kind of a association of occupational professionals. So, guild was also an important concept in industrial revolution. The emergence of modern industrial enterprises can be traced back to the end of 18th century, though it developed after 1850. The new industrial activity took two forms: plantations and factory industries. You know the areas of Assam, Darjeeling famous for plantation. Real and satisfactory progress in the factory industries began only after 1875. During the coming 2 decades, 2 textile units, cotton and jute, flourished. The Montague-Chelmsford report on constitutional reform of 1919 also pleaded for industrial development of the country. It states that on all grounds a forward policy in industrial development is urgently called for, not merely to give India economic stability, but in order to satisfy the aspirations of the people. the British brought about a most important transformation in India's agricultural economy. However, this was not with a view to improve Indian agriculture and ensure the welfare and prosperity of the Indians involved in agriculture. Instead, it was to obtain for themselves in the form of land revenue and surplus available in agriculture, and to force Indian agriculture to play its assigned role in a colonial economy. Old relationships and institutions were destroyed and new ones were born. One of the most important consequences of British rule was the decline and destruction of urban and rural handicraft industries. Friends, I am sure many of you must be interested in literature also, and all those who are interested in Hindi literature should also read the famous novels which specially focus on the industrial processes during the British time. It was not a very comfortable time though. Industrial development in India until the beginning of the 20th century was mainly confined to 4 industries, namely cotton, jute industries, coal mining and tea plantation. A few other minor industries such as cotton presses, rice, flour and timber mills, leather tanneries, woolen textiles, paper, sugar, salt, mica, petroleum and iron mines were developed. A few engineering and railway workshops and iron and brass foundries place where metal or glass is melted and shaped into objects also came into existence. Thus, it is seen that industrial development in India till 1947 was slow and stagnated and did not at all represent the industrial revolution or even the initiation of that one. What was more important, even the limited development was not independent but was under the control of foreign capital, which was British capital. Secondly, the structure of industry was such as to make its further development dependent on Britain. Since 1951, India entered a phase of industrial revolution, and it is no exaggeration to say that country has made more progress in industrialization in past more than 70 years than compared to pre-independence time. The towns and cities in India had developed firstly on religious and pilgrimage centers like Banaras. Any other cities which you can think of? Apart from Banaras, we have Puri, Allahabad, which is famous for Sangam, etc. Secondly, they emerged around the seats of government like Delhi, Kannauj, Patna, Mysore, etc. And thirdly, the commercial towns which emerged as trade centers like Lahore, Surat, Mirzapur, etc. on the trade routes to different markets within the country and into the foreign markets. The military cantonments emerged during medieval period as gadhis and shahar, that is towns, which replaced the ancient seats of governments. The provinces of India earlier, presidencies of British India and still earlier presidency towns were the administrative divisions of British governance in India. Collectively, they were called British India. In one form or another, they existed between 1612 and 1947, conventionally divided into 3 historical periods. Firstly, between 1612 and 1757, the East India Company set up factories, that is trading posts in several locations, mostly in coastal India, with the consent of the Mughal emperors or local rulers. Its rivals were the merchant trading companies of Portugal, Denmark, the Netherlands and France. By the mid-18th century, 3 presidency towns, Madras, Bombay and Calcutta had grown in size. Friends, we have to realize one thing here, that in industrial revolution process in India, apart from Britain, many other European countries also had a significant role to play. So when we want to explore more and more and detailed tidbits of industrial revolution, we should also focus about these other European countries apart from Britain. During the period of company rule in India between 1757 and 1858, the company gradually acquired sovereignty over large parts of India called presidencies. However, it also increasingly came under British government oversight, in effect sharing sovereignty with the crown. At the same time, it gradually lost its mercantile privileges. Madras Presidency, which was established in 1640, Bombay Presidency, as part of which East India Company's headquarters moved from Surat to Bombay or present day Mumbai in 1687, Bengal Presidency, which was established in 1619. Following the Indian Rebellion of 1857 led by Mangal Pandey, the company's remaining powers were transferred to the crown. Under British Raj, administrative boundaries were extended to include a few other British administered regions such as Upper Burma. Increasingly, the unwieldy presidencies were broken up into provinces. By 1851, the East India Company's vast and growing holdings across the subcontinent were still grouped into just 4 main territories. What were they? Bengal Presidency with its capital at Calcutta, Bombay Presidency with its capital at Bombay, Madras Presidency with its capital at Madras, and northwestern provinces. Indian farmers were forced to produce cotton plantations so that it can fuel English factories, as India was then under British rule. Industrial revolution brought severe consequences to society. Farmers were forced to grow cash crops in place of food crops, which resulted in awfully deadly famines in India. This also contributed in frustration, which also led to Indian independent movement. Industrial revolution in England affected India's economy after the East India Company established political power. It asserted a monopoly right to trade. It proceeded to develop a system of management and control that would eliminate competition, control costs, and ensure regular supplies of cotton and silk goods. The British brought about a most important transformation in India's agricultural economy, but this was not with a view to improve Indian agriculture and ensure the welfare and prosperity of the Indians involved in agriculture, but to obtain for themselves in the form of land revenue and surplus available in agriculture, and to force Indian agriculture to play its assigned role in a colonial economy. Old relationships and institutions were destroyed and new ones were born. As with agriculture, the British Indian government controlled trade and industry purely with a view to foster British interests. India, no doubt, underwent under the impact of colonialism a commercial revolution which integrated it with the world market, but she was forced to occupy a subordinate position. Slowly, India underwent a commercial transformation and not an industrial revolution. So, we should differentiate between these two. British were not eager to lay the foundation for an industrial revolution. First of all, most of the modern industries that did develop were controlled by foreign capitalists. Secondly, though the industrial progress during the phase was steady and continuous, but it was extremely slow. Even by 1930s, the total number of workers covered by the Factories Act was less than 1 million. Indian workers worked and lived under highly unsatisfactory conditions. Till 1891, there were no regulatory provisions concerning their hours of work. There did not exist any kind of social insurance against sickness, old age, whether unemployment, accident or sudden death also. There was no provident fund scheme. Only an inadequate maternity benefit scheme came into operation in 1930s. Whether our discussion on agricultural revolution in our previous lesson or industrial revolution in this lesson, it conveys one message very clearly, that these both revolutions, they were kind of a milestones in understanding and evolution of human society, and both these revolutions are critical to understand the establishment and evolution of cities or urban centers. All those of you, as I was mentioning, who are interested in literature, you should also read the writings of Premchand, who has beautifully narrated about the Indian scenario under the impact of British, which were mentioning that how British utilized industries and land for their purpose, and what was the mindset at a grassroots level, villages or a rural background. That is beautifully written by Premchand also. So friends, as students of urban sociology, these two revolutions will not only help us to understand cities better, but it will also help us to understand one more revolution which we will be discussing in some of our class on IT revolution. I hope both these lessons have been very interesting and clear to you, and I would again request you all to make a kind of a comparative study between the agricultural revolution and industrial revolution, and in your view, what were the stark differences between both these revolutions. Please share your observations and responses and write to me on my email pandevini@gmail.com. So after discussing these two revolutions, in our next lesson, we will have very interesting concepts which are the founding pillars of urban sociology as a discipline. So I am sure you will be with me in our next lesson, and we will explore more and more concepts in urban sociology. Thank you very much. Be happy, be safe. See you in the next class.